Good morning, Boker Tov from San Francisco. My name is Rabbi Peretz Wolf-Prusan. I'm with LehrHaus Judaica. We began doing Bay Area-wide Talmud circles with the guidance of the Olive Society and Rabbi Dean Steinsaltz. We are now in our 8th year. We have sessions, we have Talmud circles in Los Gatos and Palo Alto, several in San Francisco, Marin, and Berkeley. And this morning, we are, Baruch Hashem, we are with God's help, Bezrat Hashem, we are linking up Palo Alto and San Francisco and Berkeley and Marin. That's going to be our format. We are taking part in discussion of sacred encounters by looking at some of the 4 very amazing narratives in Masechet Ta'anit, Babylonian Talmud Ta'anit, 21b. If you're in the Steinsaltz Noe Bavli, we're on page 125. But first, I want to make a dedication on this day of learning. This is the 100th anniversary this morning of the end of World War I. It is also the 80th anniversary this week of Kristallnacht. We have to, once again, acknowledge gun violence in America, our personal self-inflicted wound, both in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh and the recent shooting in Thousand Oaks. And for us in California, as populations increase and global climate change is upon us, we are on fire. And we have lost lives in Northern California and much property in Southern California. So we keep, this is a very appropriate text to teach, which is Ta'anit, which is about responses to disaster, both theologically and personally. So we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu mitzotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And we're over to Palo Alto, where you'll hear the voice of Rabbi Jennifer Clayman.
Good morning. Can you hear me? He's nodding. Okay. All right, good. Just wanted to be sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rabbi Jennifer Clayman, and I am the teacher of the Los Gatos Talmud Circle, and I'm so pleased to be joining all of you this morning. Everyone from Palo Alto, yell hello. Hello. You can't see us, but we're here. We have 2 groups here today with us, Palo Alto and Los Gatos combined. And when we were shifting to a new Masechet for Talmud Circle, a new tractate of Talmud for Talmud Circle for this year, I was one of the voices that was really excited to that was really pushing for Tractate Ta'anit, because there's just so much in it that is fascinating and relevant for us in our world today, both in terms of what's going on around our world in terms of climate change, and also how we think about God, and also, frankly, because the tractate begins with something that we are all familiar with, which is the questions, something that we are familiar with if we are involved in Jewish prayer on a regular basis. There are in the beginning of the tractate, immediately questions that relate to the prayers that we say every day. And I just want to focus for a second on the paragraph of the Shema, which is found in Deuteronomy chapter 11. This is the paragraph that begins V'haya im Shemoah. And in a sense, this is the background of much of the Masechet. The text reads in English, "If then you obey the commandments that I, God, enjoin upon you this day, loving the Lord your God and serving him with all your heart and soul, I will grant the rain for your land in its season, the early rain and the late. You shall gather in your new grain and wine and oil. I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you shall eat your fill. And then the opposite we get. What happens if we don't obey? Take care not to be lured away and serve other gods and bow to them. For the Lord's anger will flare up against you, and he will shut up the skies so that there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its produce, and you will soon perish from the good land that the Lord is assigning to you. And in some sense, this idea forms the background of the entire Masechet. The question of the rabbis of the Talmud take for granted the idea that rain, that the state of the weather is a direct reflection of the relationship between humanity and God. And when there is a drought, or when drought conditions begin to when drought conditions begin to appear, that is a sign that there is something wrong in the relationship between humanity and God, and it is a sign that that we need to think about what we as human beings are going to do in response to that. And because we are behind schedule, I think I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues at this point. We are behind schedule. I think I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues at this point.
Shalom, everyone.
We are behind schedule. I think I'm going to.
There you go. Shalom, everyone. It's Deena Aronoff here, the teacher of the Talmud Circle in Marin at the Osha Marin JCC. And thank you so much, Jennifer, for reminding us of how current the themes of this tractate are. We really are in a time of crisis in terms of our natural environment, and this tractate is asking the question of how to make sense of it. And something striking about the section that Peretz chose for us to study together as part of this Aleph Day of Learning is that it's a set of stories, not about the sages and their learning and how Torah study will spare us or save us from these calamities, but actually how everyday anonymous acts of kindness are what will kind of pull us out of this, a terrible situation. And a lot of times it's thought that it was really the Hasidic movement of the early modern period when you started to have these notions of the anonymous, uneducated, simple, pious person whose meritorious acts outweigh even the finest of rabbinic scholarship. But actually that's a theme already in the Talmud itself and already a kind of typical trope in rabbinic storytelling. And we have that here. And I always like to link up the section that we're in to the larger tractate and discussion. This section in the Gemara is talking about incidents of epidemics, of great fires, flooding, and at which point are you permitted to declare a collective fast, to blast the shofar in a cry for help, both to other human beings and to God. And there are a few incidents, not yet in the section we're studying together, but leading up to it, in which the Gemara, you could say politely, not so politely, speculates about whether it's the merit of the sages that accounts for why it is that certain people were spared in a situation of a flood or an epidemic or a fire. The first is Rav, the great Amorah, the first generation Amorah. Rav, he's living in Surah. There is a terrible epidemic, but everyone in his neighborhood seems to have been spared. Let me just check. I'm on page still 124. I know that you don't have it just yet. But in Surah, there was a plague in the town of Rav. It's in the neighborhood of Rav. It seems that people were spared. I'm on 124. Those of you in the Talmud groups with your Gemara, you can open it up and look at that bottom paragraph there. Now, the Gemara uses a lot of euphemism here to make this kind of difficult point. Initially, it was thought, oh, it must be that it's the merit of Rav, the great sage. It's his merit that explains why that neighborhood was spared. But then all of the people, it's a kind of democratic dream story, all of the people are visited with a dream that tells them that this epidemic and sparing the neighborhood of the epidemic is too small a matter for the great merit of Rav. And so it's not actually because of Rav that you've all been spared, but instead it's because of that man, we don't get a name, anonymity here I think is significant, who would lend his tools to prepare sites for burial. Now, Rav Steinsaltz in his commentary, but also the medieval commentators try to understand, what does this mean? Rav, this is too small a matter. This is a trifle. It's not appropriate to think that the great merit of Rav was necessary to spare people from the epidemic. But I think you might, I don't know if you're all with me on this, but it doesn't seem to me like being spared of an epidemic is such a trifle. I think the Gemara is using very indirect speech to say, actually, the stuff of the merit of the scholars is not the stuff that can redeem a neighborhood from danger in this way. And it's actually the anonymous, everyday kindness of this person who lends his tools out. And you know what? In the time of an epidemic, that could mean that he's risking his life. He lends his tools out, and in so doing has somehow redeemed that neighborhood and spared them. And we're going to come back to this notion of a local community, because when you lend out your tools that way, you're creating community, and that could be also part of what sustains people in time of crisis, and in very literal ways can save people in time of crisis. The next anecdote, and forgive me, Rav Peretz, that I'm only gradually making our way to the text that we're going to study a little more closely together, but there's another incident at the top of 125 in Drokart. There's a terrible fire, which, and as you mentioned, Peretz and Jennifer, this is just, the relevance is frightening and stirring, and that's why I want to be very sensitive as we handle these materials. There's a fire, and there's one neighborhood, the neighborhood of Rav Huna, where the fire doesn't reach, and they're spared. And then they're asking this question, what could explain it? And of course, it must be the great merit of the sage Rav Huna. But now we're already prepared. We're primed for how this story is going to go. Oh, no. The great merit of Rav Huna would not account for this trifle, which is that neighborhood was spared by the fire. And so what did spare the neighborhood of the fire? And it's the actions of a certain woman, again, anonymous, who used to heat her oven and lend it to her neighbors. And in this case, it becomes very clear that there was someone in the neighborhood who, in effect, was doing a great act of charity, and the kindest kind, the kind where the people receiving it are not put in any kind of subordinate position. It's done in a good spirit of saying, oh, I'm already heating up my oven. You're welcome to use it. You're welcome to use it. Fuel was a very expensive resource, and she was sharing that fuel with her neighborhood. And that is the action that spared the people. And while the Gemara, and I know that I have only 3-4 more minutes, while the Gemara it's picking up steam here, it's saying, okay, in the face of terrible disasters, what is it that can spare us if we're lucky? Or what kind of meritorious deeds should we focus on and bring into the light? And they're moving away from the notion that it's the more kind of elite scholarly activities of the sages, and moving more and more into this notion that it's anonymous acts of kindness, that generosity, of giving to others. Those are the actions that seem to have any relevance in these times of disaster. And the story that we're going to look at, and I know that it's on the screen and it's also in your Gemaras if you're in the Talmud circle right now. The story is of Abba Umana at the bottom of 125, Ta'anit Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Bet. Abba Umana is another ordinary person, has a very ordinary name, basically some kind of father master, a master of a craft, and the craft that he's a master of is bloodletting. And well, you might say, well, that's enough. He's a physician and he's helping people and helping them get well. But there was something in the style of how he healed people. He healed people with modesty, as we'll see. And he also, when he took payment for what he did it in such a way that if you were too poor to pay, he wouldn't even know that you hadn't made a donation. He had a concealed box where the people would pay him upon leaving, and he wouldn't know who paid him and who didn't. And then the people, of course, would not have to publicize whether they were at a difficult time in their lives and couldn't afford to pay. The way it's described is that Abba Umana, Abba the bloodletter, had greetings from the yeshiva on high every day. And that's compared to Abaye and Rava, a great pair of Amoraim, kind of known for disagreeing one with the other. Abaye at least got such a greeting every Erev Shabbos, but Rava only on Erev Yom Kippur, which we'll come back to in a little bit. And then what the Gemara does is it describes the meritorious deeds of Abba Umana, and it has to do with how he treated the men and women, how he covered his patients so that when he was treating them, they weren't exposed unnecessarily. And in that theme of not exposing people unnecessarily, he also had, as I said, payment done in a hidden place. And this way it wouldn't shame those who couldn't pay or couldn't pay much. What I'd like to do is turn the page and use the remaining time to explore how it is that Abaye, who was a bit distressed about the great merit of Abba Umana, I think he felt like, why is that kind of merit so out of reach for him? So he sent 2 students to explore his generosity and kindness. And I'm paraphrasing what you have at the top of the page there. The sages came to visit Abba Umana. What did Abba Umana do? Sat them down, using the English here on the page, gave them food to eat, gave them something to drink, and at night he spread out these woolen mats for them to sleep on. Now this story has something in common. If some of you remember learning the story of Hillel and the attempt to anger Hillel, and you just couldn't. Do you remember that person came to visit Hillel and kept interrupting him while he was shampooing his hair on a Friday afternoon? And Hillel was kind and patient and kind and patient. Well, Abba Umana has that same quality. His 2 guests take the wool mats, tie them up, and bring them to the marketplace, presumably to sell them. And when they run into Abba Umana, they say to him, how much do these cost? Sort of asking him to buy them. And he gives a very low price. And they say, don't you think it's worth a little bit more? He says, well, that's what I paid for it. And so that's how much I'm going to guess. They say, these are your mats. You should come and take them. He said, well, I assumed that you needed to redeem some captives. And for that reason, you took them. He gave them the benefit of the doubt. And then they said, well, here, they're yours. This was just we were just trying to provoke you. You can have them back. And he said something gets even more powerful. He said, actually, when I woke up in the morning and they were gone, I released them. They were no longer my own. I declared them a gift to those who needed them more. And so I actually will not be taking those back. So a total release of property and of ownership to the extreme. And those are the kinds of actions that this section of the Gemara wants to highlight. And just to kind of bring it together, and if we had time to discuss, and maybe we will in small groups, what are the virtues that the Gemara is trying to raise up here? And by the way, it does this at the expense of the sages. I mean, the way it's set up here is you have the greatest sages you can think of. Rav Huna, Abaye, and Rava. These are the great sages, the masters of the oral tradition, and they provide the foil for the kinds of people and actions that can serve to save the people or redeem the people in times of distress. The anonymous person who lends the tools and property during a time of epidemic, the anonymous person who heats up and uses her household fuel so that others can have warm food to eat. It's the physician who heals people free of charge. It is acts of hospitality, a letting go of private property. These are the acts of kindness that this section raises up as a measure that can somehow serve to contend with the disasters that can befall a community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Deena, and before that, Jennifer. Professor Deena Aronoff was teaching from Marin, and Rabbi Jennifer Clayman was the combined Los Gatos Palo Alto class. I'm here in San Francisco, and then in a few moments, we'll turn over the class to Rabbi Dorothy Richman in Berkeley. Okay. So I want to focus on I'm going to pick up from Deena. She handed off a really nice, this really powerful concept of hidden causality. The Gemara is very allergic in some ways to the concrete notions in Deuteronomy that if you do this, then this is what happens. Because clearly Job is one response, but the other response is that God's righteousness is often not obvious, and therefore there might be righteous people in the crowd who are not obvious. There might be a kind of a sadikut link in the yeshiva lamata and the yeshiva amala, the yeshiva on low and the yeshiva on high. And the techniques, as Deena has handed it off, is what we call parabolic storytelling. This is not what you expect. You expect wonder-working rabbis, like Choni, and instead you get wonderful people. So I'm going to shorten mine a little bit. There's a wonderful story about a jailer, and that is on the top of page 127. You would not expect compassion and action from the jailer, but he is basically protecting the most fragile and most likely to be sexually assaulted, which is women in jail. This is something we need to emphasize and understand, that the Gemara already understands that sexual assault on women is prevalent, especially when men are absent in their care, especially when they're in jail, or at least men don't believe them, which is a bigger problem. In this case, though, this jailer is proactively looking out for the women under his care. So that's on page 127. I really want to focus my little sharing about the jesters, which is the third paragraph down on page 127. That's in Ta'anit, Parak 3, 22a. Maybe it's because I spend so much time as a class clown, I really think the jesters are the most important people. Okay, and my class here, who is accustomed to my very bad jokes, is verifying my statement. Okay, fine. So, we're all good. We're all good here. All right. So there's this, and I love the start because it's Dadaki, which is basically Dadaki Ahaki. In the meantime, two brothers came to the marketplace. Which is this great kind of like commonplace, the marketplace. And Elijah said to Rabbi Baruch, these two also have a share in the world to come. And Rabbi Baruch went over to the men and said to them, really, what's your occupation? And they said to him, we are jesters. We cheer up the depressed. Alternatively, when we see two people who have a quarrel between them, we strive to make peace. Not the rabbis, not the sages, but the jesters, the people that you would pass by in the street, juggling, put a hat out in front of them and playing a guitar. The people who maybe in your family don't make as much money or have the power, but have always a kind word and a joke to tell. This is the least likely group to be tzaddiks, the clowns. In fact, we can actually just underline here that this is the send in the clowns salvation to quarrels, needless hatred, and depression. I recommend to you anything that deals with laughter in these very, very, very dark times. So we had 4 stories of unexpected tzaddikim in this section on Tanit. Just as my teacher, the great Dr. Mahali would say, that the Gemara was not composed by soulless, dead in the head old men. That there are jokes, there's humor, but more than that, there's deep wisdom, that what we see in the world is not always what there is in the world. And with that, I'm turning over to Rabbi Dorothy Richman at the Berkeley JCC. She's coming on screen right now, and I will be muted and she will be audio.
Hello, friends. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. So it's wonderful learning with everyone this morning. Hi, Sandy. I want to just say 2 brief thoughts inspired by the text and by my colleagues. I want to first point out in those beautiful stories that Deena shared with us, the first 2, where the anonymous civilians, right? The anonymous, unnamed tzaddikim, righteous people, were responsible for the saving of specific deaths. I just want to point out that I think that the text is being quite actually specific here. And it's functioning on a midah keneged midah basis, which is a measure for measure. So in the same way that the man who lent his tools to bury the dead, right? It was because he was honoring death that death in the epidemic passed over them. And then story, what does the woman do to spare the neighborhood from fire unintentionally? She uses fire, right? She heats her oven, and because she uses the fire in a way that is generous, fire itself goes around. I think it's important also just to point out that the theology here, the theology points us to see that we are trying to make meaning out of tragedy, and we're trying to make meaning out of things that don't make sense. Why was this person spared and this person not? And I'm not pointing out the measure for measure quality here to say this is how it works and that I accept this theology. But I am pointing it out to show that these questions have always been asked, and they're asking them in a way where they're trying to find answers that will work for them, right? In the same way, whether we actually believe there's an answer or not, continue to try to find an answer for ourselves. And in the second stories that Rabbi Peretz pointed out to us, which continued the theme that Dr. Aronoff pointed out of the, in some ways, perhaps suspicion of these leaders, of these rabbis, of the elite. I just want to point out a very simple point, which is that these stories of Abba Umana and the jesters and the jailer, they only work if the rabbis are suspicious of them. If the rabbis are doing what rabbis are supposed to be doing, which is dan l'chafschut, which is give the benefit of the doubt to everyone, then they, like Abba Umana, no matter what they see, would be imagining the best case scenario of character in front of them. But the rabbis are actually the ones that have less trust and faith than the people who know less text. right? And so I see that those stories are really just giving us a reminder, right? If anything, that as we learn these texts, to remember to look for the best in everyone. And if we do that, maybe we too will find miracles. And may the merit of everything we can do somehow go to putting these fires out speedily in our days.
Well, if you joined us this morning, you saw what is really great about my job. I get to work with the most wonderful people, Rabbi Clayman in the South Bay and Rabbi Richman in Berkeley and Professor Deena Aronoff everywhere. She's everywhere. And sitting next to Dorothy somewhere in Berkeley are also some other wonderful teachers in our community, including our tech rep for this morning, Rachel Brody. She'll never live this one down, but this is good. If there's anyone in any group or anyone, especially online, who's watching now and wants to send in a question via the chat box, or if someone has a, please do that. We have a few minutes left. I don't know why, but we do. It's a miracle. And so if you want to just send in a question via the chat box, or if someone in one of the sections starts waving their hands furiously and we can see them, we can't see Berkeley anymore. You've gone away visually, so that's not going to work. But if there's a question from here or anywhere, please ask now. Any questions here?
So tell me what the question is and I'll write it in.
On page 125, the story of Abba receiving greetings.
And I'll write it in.
On page 125.
Hold on.
Story.
Maybe I'll leave this one in.
Abba receiving greetings.
Got to make it a short question.
What does it mean to receive the greetings daily, only on Shabbat and only at Erev Yom Kippur? And how would this other person even know about that, much less be disturbed by it?
All right, could someone who heard the question repeat the question to the microphone?
Why don't you just come up?
Can you hear us?
Now, yes.
Okay, great. Would you like to, why don't you just say your
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want.
Oh, sorry. Do you want me to do it?
On the paragraph from the bottom of
Yeah,
page
so how do we justify to ourselves studying Talmud right now, since these are all stories about people who are not learned and who are out just doing simple mitzvot to help other people?
Go ahead.
You may have to repeat the question. We didn't get the first part.
All right. All right. I'm gonna do it for you, okay? For Rob.
Thank you. And
Give
thank
me
you,
a
Rob.
thumbs up if you can hear me. Yeah. So Rob's question is, how can we actually justify studying Talmud right now when all these stories seem to be pointing to us that studying Talmud isn't necessarily the best way to get merit, that actually just getting out there and doing mitzvot are? Is that, yeah.
Can I take a first shot? These are not real. These are constructed stories. These are closer to Zen koans. These are like early Hasidic parables. This is actually very. This is the irony is these little gems are. These are closer to Zen koans. These are like early Hasidic parables. This is actually very. This is the irony is these little gems. These are closer to Zen koans. These are like early Hasidic parables. This is actually very. This is the irony is these little gems. These are closer to Zen koans. These are like early have to have the other sites muted. Oh my God. All right. Well, that was actually very creepy. I heard myself go right around the bay and come back again. I'll make it very brief. These are carefully constructed parables. These are not random encounters. They're artistic. They're made to look like random encounters. So this is a Talmudic literary device of the rabbis, of which they are actors in a scene. In the scene that they've composed, there's more in it than anyone could have just randomly found. So they've laid like goose eggs all around the place to be actually revealed, to reveal the unrevealed. So the crazy part is you actually have to know the Talmud very well to hide how well you know the Talmud. So it's a parabolic story. So it doesn't sound preachy, sermonic, or dull. It is actually inviting, accessible, and enticing. And so therefore, you really have to be an author of Talmud to pull this off. Deena, did you have a comment? Deena? You really have to be an author of Talmud to pull this off. Deena, did you have a comment?
I do have a comment.
Okay, unmute yourself.
Thought on this, and I'm so glad that Rob asked this question. There is an irony to studying the Talmud when the message that it's giving over is how important these anonymous acts of kindness are. But I think it's a dialectic. That is, we human beings act. We don't often act randomly. We're shaped by our culture. We're shaped by the stories that we tell. And so we study this text to kind of edify, I think, ourselves and to motivate us to act, to get a sense of the power of our actions. How powerful it is, and Dorothy pointed out, that fire is a powerful element that can save and destroy. And to understand that when we light the ovens in our home, we can light it for others and for the good, and we can light it for harm. And so back to Rob's question, I think each of us has to strike a balance with how much time do we spend engaging in study and fine-tuning our ethical compass through storytelling and communal life and communal study, and then how much time we do as we in the world of action, taking what we study and what we learn and bringing it towards action. I think if we can err too far in one extreme or the other and kind of get swallowed up in the ivory tower world of study. And we can also put our nose to the grindstone, as it were, in the world of action for so long that we lose our sense of motivation and purpose. And we need the nourishment of study and participating in these kind of communal efforts in order to stay motivated and to stay alive in our world of activism. So I appreciate the question because it's a reminder that each of us has to find that balance between study and action, midrash and maaseh.
That is a great closure. I think we're right at time, and so I want to thank Rabbi Jennifer Clayman and Rabbi Dorothy Richman and Professor Deena Aronoff and all those members of the Bay Area Community Talmud Circles, Aubrey Greenspan, who stitches all the cloth together to make one big scroll of us. And I want to thank the Olive Society for inspiring us to spread Talmud study around the Bay. And we are endeavoring to do that in B'Shem Ro in the name of Rabbi Dean Steinsaltz, who proclaims through us, let my people learn. And we'll add on Professor Deena Aronoff, we should learn and do, because we also know that people who can't do often teach, and those who can't teach, teach Jim. That's a different source. But for us right now, we're going to say thank you, good morning, and good night to whoever you are in the world. Shalom. Goodbye.